The Senate Judiciary Committee room was unusually tense that morning. Pam Bondi sat upright at the witness table, composed and unreadable. She had been called in for what was supposed to be a routine oversight session, but everyone in D.C. knew it was anything but routine. Across from her, Senator Lindsey Graham wore a confident smirk. He had chaired hundreds of these hearings. His plan was simple: pressure Bondi into backing off the investigation she had launched into a multi-state network of lobbyist back-channel payments that, as the whispers went, could trace back to his own office. Graham tapped his pen, leaning into the microphone. "Ms. Bondi, let's be clear, are you accusing sitting members of the Senate of criminal activity without hard proof?" he said, each word sharp and calculated. Pam didn't blink. "Senator Graham, I'm not accusing anyone. I'm presenting evidence. And I'd advise you not to mischaracterize what's about to be entered into the record." The room went silent. From her briefcase, Bondi pulled a thin folder stamped with a federal seal. Inside was an affidavit signed by 2 whistleblowers, and, more damning, bank transfer records showing direct connections between lobbyist funds and a personal account registered to a shell company in Charleston, South Carolina. Registered, as it turned out, in the name of a family trust. Lindsey Graham's family trust. Graham shifted uncomfortably. "This is a joke," he scoffed. "A stunt." Pam looked up calmly. "If it's a stunt, Senator, why did you attempt to have this hearing cancelled at 11:42 p.m. last night?" Murmurs rippled across the room. The moment Pam Bondi dropped that detail, the atmosphere shifted. Reporters in the back leaned forward. Committee aides began whispering nervously into their phones. Even a few of the junior senators glanced toward Graham, suddenly unsure. Lindsey Graham forced a laugh. "Let me be crystal clear, this is political theater. You want headlines, Ms. Bondi, not justice." Pam slid the file toward the committee clerk. "I'm here under oath, Senator. Everything I've presented is already backed by 2 independent audits, a sealed DOJ memo, and now, this." She reached for a second envelope, marked subpoena compliance. "This contains sworn testimony from a former staffer of yours. He details the routing of funds through a consultancy firm operating out of a P.O. box in Columbia, South Carolina, money that was then funneled into campaign-adjacent super PACs." Graham's face flushed red. "You're trying to destroy my name with hearsay and desperation." "I've served this country honorably," Pam didn't let him finish. "Then you have nothing to fear from a full investigation. But this committee, and the American public, deserve transparency. And according to Title 18 U.S. Code Section 201, what's described here isn't just unethical, it's a federal crime." The chairman of the committee, a normally mild-mannered senator from Ohio, cleared his throat. "I believe we need to recess briefly to review this new material." Graham shot him a glare. "You can't be serious." But no one came to his defense. Lindsey Graham stood as the committee recessed, gripping the edge of the table like it might steady him. The cameras hadn't stopped rolling, C-SPAN was still broadcasting live, and social media was already exploding with clips of Bondi's bold delivery. He leaned toward the chairman. "You can't let this circus continue. This is a political hit job." But the chairman didn't meet his eyes. "We have a legal obligation to assess the evidence, Lindsey. Especially if it involves financial misconduct at the federal level." Meanwhile, Pam Bondi stayed seated, composed as ever. Her legal team behind her began quietly handing out copies of the subpoena packet to the appropriate Senate staffers. One aide whispered something in her ear. She nodded and replied just loud enough for Graham to hear, "Federal marshals are en route." Graham's head snapped toward her. "You're bluffing." "No, Senator," she said. "They're here to collect supplementary material tied to sealed warrants. You've been under quiet investigation for 6 weeks. Today is just the beginning." A heavy silence spread. Staffers stepped away from Graham as if he were radioactive. His phone buzzed on the table. He checked it and instantly paled. The name flashing on the screen was Attorney General Nathan Winters. Then, two men in suits entered the room through a side door. U.S. Marshals. They spoke briefly with the chairman and handed him a document. The chairman looked up, stunned. "Senator Graham, you are requested to remain on site pending a compliance detainment order." Graham backed up a step, his face frozen. "You're going to regret this." Pam stood slowly and faced him. "No, Senator. The only regret here is that it took this long." The room was no longer a hearing, it was a reckoning. The two U.S. Marshals approached Lindsey Graham calmly but firmly, one speaking while the other reached discreetly behind his back. "Senator, we're executing a federal compliance detainment pursuant to sealed orders under Title 18. You are not under arrest at this moment, but you are required to accompany us for immediate questioning." Graham looked around the chamber, as if expecting someone, anyone, to object. But no one did. He locked eyes with Pam Bondi. "You just burned every bridge in Washington." Pam replied without flinching. "Justice doesn't care about bridges. Only truth." Then, with a sudden move of protest, Graham stepped back and raised his voice. "This is outrageous. You can't treat a sitting senator like a criminal." But the marshal had already pulled out a pair of standard-issue restraints. The metallic click echoed across the room as one cuff locked onto Graham's wrist. "Sir, please don't resist. This is procedural." Cameras flashed wildly as journalists surged forward. Pam stepped aside and let the scene unfold. She had done what few had dared, brought real consequences into the halls of power. And she wasn't finished yet. As the marshals led Graham out, now silent, now pale, Bondi picked up her binder and turned to the remaining committee members. "I suggest you all review your campaign records carefully. This probe is ongoing." No one said a word. The footage of Lindsey Graham being led away in cuffs hit every major news outlet within minutes. By noon, the clip had gone viral. Cable news anchors scrambled to update their headlines. Social media was on fire. #Graham in cuffs, #Bondi bombshell, #Senate shakedown inside the Department of Justice. Phones rang nonstop. Senators were calling their lawyers. Lobbyists were scrubbing emails. Even the White House released a carefully worded statement: "We support all lawful investigations and believe in due process, regardless of political standing." But Pam Bondi wasn't watching the chaos unfold. She was back at her office, meeting with a forensic accounting team. The probe didn't stop with Graham, he was just the first domino. Her lead investigator entered the room holding a tablet. "Pam, you need to see this." Displayed on the screen was a financial trail connecting Graham's Shell Trust to 3 other sitting senators, and one high-ranking cabinet official. All under the radar. All tied to the same DC consulting firm. Bondi exhaled slowly. "It's bigger than we thought. Much bigger." Meanwhile, inside a secure holding room beneath the Capitol, Lindsey Graham sat across from 2 federal investigators. His usual bravado was gone. "You don't understand," he muttered. "This goes beyond me. If I talk, it all comes down." One of the agents leaned in. "Then maybe it's time you start talking." Back in the federal holding room, Lindsey Graham stared at the cold table surface, fingers interlocked, knuckles pale. The silence was deliberate. The agents wanted him to feel the weight of it, the pressure, the isolation. He finally broke. "What do I get if I cooperate?" The lead investigator didn't flinch. "You give us names, accounts, transactions, communications, everything. In exchange, we recommend limited charges and possible immunity under 18 U.S. Code Section 6002. But you talk now." Graham hesitated. Then, almost in a whisper, "You're going to need to expand your list. There's a fund operating out of Zurich. Not just senators, think judicial appointments. Think energy contracts. Think foreign governments. The agents glanced at each other. This wasn't just a campaign finance scandal anymore, it was a national security concern. Meanwhile, Pam Bondi stood in a secure briefing room with senior DOJ officials. Her expression was steely. "This isn't just about corruption," she said. "It's a coordinated influence operation. And if what Graham just gave up is real, we're talking indictments at the highest levels." An assistant rushed in. "Pam, you need to see this. The Wall Street Journal just dropped a report. Graham's law firm was quietly dissolved 3 days ago. And several of his overseas accounts have already been drained." Her eyes narrowed. He knew this was coming. She turned to the room. "We need to move faster." Suddenly, the entire operation shifted from exposure to containment. As evening fell over D.C., federal servers buzzed with activity. New subpoenas were issued. Foreign asset tracking systems lit up with alerts. Someone, perhaps multiple someones, was trying to bury the trail before it fully surfaced. Pam Bondi stood in the war room at DOJ headquarters, surrounded by analysts and prosecutors. A live map of financial transfers glowed on the screen behind her. Red lines arced from Zurich, the Cayman Islands, Cyprus, straight into accounts linked to shell companies in Virginia, Texas, and New York. "This isn't a scandal," one investigator muttered. "It's a syndicate." Pam nodded. "And it's been operating under congressional protection for years." Suddenly, her phone buzzed with a secure message. "Urgent, Graham requesting face-to-face. Claims info on sitting Supreme Court Justice." Pam's pulse quickened. Within an hour, she was seated across from Graham in a high-security interview room. The cuffs were off now, but the pressure was on. "You said you had more," she said coldly. He looked tired. Defeated. But not entirely broken. "There's a reason you were targeted, Pam. You think this was about me? I was just the public face. The deeper connections, those go all the way to the judiciary. And if you touch them, you'll be declared a national threat. They'll shut you down legally. Or otherwise." Pam stared at him, expression unreadable. "You just made this personal." Graham leaned forward. "Then you'd better be ready for what happens next. Because if you don't tread carefully, you'll end up in a courtroom with no rules." Pam Bondi left the federal interview room without saying another word. But inside, her mind was racing. A sitting Supreme Court justice? If Graham was telling the truth, then the rot went far deeper than anyone suspected. Back in her office, she called her most trusted federal investigator, Agent Ruiz. Scrub everything related to the Zurich Fund and overlay it with travel logs of federal judiciary members. Discreetly. If this ties back to the bench, we need hard evidence before anyone else finds out we're close. Ruiz paused. "You think they'll come after you?" Pam didn't hesitate. "They already are." Within 24 hours, her encrypted cloud account was breached. 3 internal emails leaked to the press, edited to appear like she had financial ties to a private intel firm. Bondi knew it was a coordinated hit. But the timing confirmed it. Graham's warning wasn't a bluff. And yet, it only made her more determined. At a closed-door emergency session with DOJ leadership and Senate oversight officials, Pam laid it all out. This isn't about one man in handcuffs. This is about the system being compromised from the inside. The same offshore accounts funding Graham's PACs also contributed to a federal judge's private investment trust. And we have reason to believe, she paused and looked directly at the oversight chair, that at least one sitting justice has been issuing favorable rulings in exchange for silent payouts through family-linked LLCs. The room fell dead quiet. One official whispered, stunned, "That's treason." Pam nodded. "And we're going to prove it." The next 48 hours moved like a storm through Washington. Behind the scenes, a shadow war unfolded, cease and desist letters flew, back-channel communications buzzed, and former allies of Pam Bondi began distancing themselves quietly. One senator even left the country under the guise of a trade mission. Meanwhile, Bondi and her core team launched a classified initiative dubbed Operation Gavlpoint, a full-spectrum investigation into judicial complicit corruption. The target, a Supreme Court justice with a history of obscure rulings benefiting entities tied to Zurich and the Cayman Islands. The evidence was tightening. Bondi stared at a flowchart pinned to the wall, a network of offshore firms, political operatives, real estate front companies, and one unassuming name at the center, Justice L. Radin. Agent Ruiz entered, holding a sealed document. "We got it. FISA warrant approved. Surveillance begins tonight." Pam exhaled. "Good. Let's see what happens when a justice believes no one is watching." But outside the walls of DOJ, something else was shifting. A leaked report hit a fringe news site, a fabricated claim that Bondi had forged parts of her own investigation. Within hours, bots amplified it across social media, cable pundits parroted it on live TV, and one anonymous insider called it the biggest abuse of power since Hoover. The smear campaign had begun. Still, Bondi held her ground. She knew the next move would be bold, possibly reckless, but necessary. She stepped to the podium in a press briefing room filled to capacity. Holding up the redacted report, she stared directly into the cameras. "This is no longer about politics. It's about whether justice in this country is for sale. And I will not stand down, not today, not ever." Some applauded. Others grimaced. And somewhere, behind a curtain of silence, Justice Radin picked up a burner phone and made a call. "They're getting too close. Activate contingency protocol." At 3:42 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled into a quiet Georgetown alleyway. Inside, DOJ cyberforensics agents worked quickly and silently under darkness. They had just received a flash drive from a whistleblower tied to an offshore compliance firm in Luxembourg, one that managed Shell holdings linked to Justice L. Radin. Pam Bondi watched from a secure surveillance van. Her jaw tightened as the first decrypted folder loaded. It contained internal memos, signed approvals, time-stamped transfers, and encrypted email exchanges between Radin's legal aides and foreign financial entities. It was irrefutable. But they weren't the only ones watching. At 6 a.m., Bondi's convoy left DOJ headquarters with an armed escort. The documents were being submitted directly to the Chief Justice and the Attorney General simultaneously. It was the only way to prevent them from being intercepted, or buried. By 8:15 a.m., the Chief Justice issued an emergency internal order. Justice Radin was placed on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. It was the first time in modern history a sitting Supreme Court justice had been suspended without resignation. The media erupted. Headlines scorched the internet. Historic bombshell, Supreme Court rocked by corruption probe, Pam Bondi's investigation stuns Washington, justice suspended. But there was one more scene. That evening, in a quiet Capitol hallway, Lindsey Graham, now released under protective terms, was seen leaving through a back exit, sunglasses on, a folder tucked under his arm. Reporters shouted questions. "Senator, are you cooperating? Do you regret trusting Zurich? Is it true you named Radin yourself?" He didn't answer. But he paused, then turned toward the crowd and said, "Next time, maybe listen to Bondi." The door slammed behind him. Inside her office, Pam Bondi looked at the final affidavit with a heavy breath. Operation Gavlpoint had cracked open a protected shell Washington never expected anyone to touch. The price had been high, smears, threats, political exile, but the precedent had been set. No one was above the law anymore.